If you've been following along with what I'm doing here, you'll have one head that will have no sculpting, no extra sculpting. So you'll have one head and a couple of iterations of that saved. And then you'll have zombified that and really explored the brush potential inside of ZBrush and have something roughly along these lines. And now we want to get in and start to add more to this. So everything's progressing slowly. I have introduced you to the brush tools, so let's just recap. We've looked at the brush system, and in terms of the brush system we looked at things like standard brush, clay buildup, Damien standard brush, things like that. Then I introduced you into layers when we started creating the zombie head, so that I started introducing you to a production workflow that allows you to kind of create iterations and go step by step, dial things back, and just really have a lot more flexibility in your sculpting workflow. And then I also introduced you along the lines to morph target. Okay, that was just a brief introduction, kind of interrelating with layers. But deformations was one of the ones where we were able to get in and really adjust the skin quality and really work with the model. And along the way, wrapping all of this stuff up, you should have picked up a sense that you want to put stuff onto the model. You want to put clay and volume and all of that stuff onto the model. That's what the brush system is all about. And then you want to get in and use things like polish and deformation and mask by cavity to start to work with your details and start to kind of create a little bit more of the skin. You don't want the skin at the end result. You don't want to sculpt all the way to the skin. Let some of these deformations and some of these tricks work. In clay, people work with melting their wax, melting their clay, all of that stuff, all to get effects that are like this. So let the program do some of that work for you. But now that I want to go in and add a part, how do I do that? Well, that's where we've got to ramp up our knowledge a little bit. And so we're going to start this as a new section. But basically at this point, we're going to look at the SubTool subpalette. Okay, this is all part of the tool palette. And we're going to start looking at ways to add subtools. Okay, so right now we're working with one subtool. But what we want to do is keep the head intact, and we're going to start to add more. So we need to add a body, we need to add hair, we need to add a whole bunch of different things to the model to start to get to where it's a full character. The simplest thing that I think we can start off with is by adding the hair. So we're going to add basically a polysphere to our model and have that as two working subtools that we will be dealing with together, and that'll give you a really good sense of how to work with subtools. So to do that, I'm going to go into subtool palette, I'm going to press append, and I'm going to append a sphere 3D. Okay, now keep in mind a sphere 3D is not something I usually work with. I don't work with it all by itself. But when you append it, it automatically converts it into a polymesh. Okay, but it has really horrible topology. So before you go too much further, you want to be aware of this. You want to be aware that this is what you really want out of this, or not want, but this is what you're getting out of this model. And by horrible topology, I mean what's called a pole, everything going into it. Okay, and when you divide that, all kinds of things happen at the center, and it starts to pull away and gets to be this kind of empty hole in there, and you can smooth it out, and it doesn't behave well. But that's okay, because we're going to use Dynamesh to start to work with this. And so I'm introducing you to Subtool Palette, and I'm also going to be reintroducing you into Dynamesh. Dynamesh is going to be a major part of our working process. Almost everything that I do is going to go through Dynamesh at one phase, and usually in the beginning. Okay, now I like this default resolution of 128, but it bears kind of discussion about what this is. So let's turn polyframe on, and let's undo this. And I'm going to set my resolution to 64, let's say. That's what we started with in the very first model. And notice the size of the polygons. Not that large, but not that small. Let's undo. Set this all the way down. Well, yeah, let's set it all the way down. There you go. Set it to 16. And, we're getting larger. But at 128, that's the default, we're going to have a lot to work with. And I think this is a really good amount of geometry to deal with. Now keep in mind that symmetry is not turned on. So you have to either go to Transform, activate Symmetry, or press X on the keyboard. Alright, and I'm going to turn Polyframe off. Now when you're working with subtools, there's another button right below Polyframe that's going to be useful. It's called Transparency. And below that, Ghost. So Ghost is it's ZBrush's own way of working with transparency, and it's very valuable for some things. For some things, it'll get in the way. It's up to you. I'm going to turn it off. Look at this from a side view. I'm going to turn Perspective off as well, and switch over to the Move brush, which I have on a hotkey. And I'm just going to pull the hair back. Make sure it's outside the model. Make sure it conforms nicely from the side. And let's find the hairline. Okay, turn transparency off so I can see how it works with the ear. Alright, we don't have a neck on this guy yet. That's something we're going to want to consider, but we don't have it now. And let's figure out a general sense of what we want to do. I'm just going to push it in real close. Transparency's on. Off. And let's give him a bit of a hairline. Something like that. Already starting to look like Lance Hendrickson, I think is the name, the actor. Yeah, that'll work. Okay, Dynamesh is on, so you're just going to smooth these things out. And now we're going to start to work to create some kind of hair pattern. Now keep in mind, the way subtools work, you can only work with one subtool at a time. That's what's really important to keep in mind, and that's why we're keeping this really simple in the beginning. But I've got the hair selected as my active subtool, and if I go in and try to work on the face, it's not going to let me. I have to select the face, and then it'll let me get in there and start to mess with it. And so we've revealed some work that we haven't done at the top of the head. So let's just go into, is it this one? Let's go, we'll add it into that layer. I'm going to use smooth to replicate some of what the polish function did. And first I gotta get a bunch of clay on there. I gotta get some effects, so I'm just gonna brush randomly around. And crossing it, really key. And then just tapping to blur. The polish and the other approach we used is going to give us, in my opinion, it gives you more of control, but this is going to be our quick and dirty way. You can also come in with H polish, and I'll go back to the regular, and I'm just going to tamp it down in some places. Okay, So hopefully that won't be too distracting for you. And let's go back in to our hair. I'm not going to create a layer for the hair. I'm okay with it. Well, we may not. Depends on what we want to do spiky wise, but I'm gonna leave that as an open equation. We're going to keep Dynamesh on because we are going to be doing some work developing the look. But the goal right now is to see what kind of hair we want. And so we're going to be really loose, which means I should create a layer. Layers are funky things. You do not want to have a layer on while using Dynamesh actually. All of my layers before we're done with Dynamesh off. So let's leave it off. And let's just go into clay buildup, and I'm going to switch my stroke to spray. And I'm going to turn symmetry off. Okay, it's kind of interesting, kind of not. It's not small enough. I need more. I need it to be smaller in its noise. So we could come in and change our alpha to say alpha 46. Okay, is this doing anything interesting? Pressing Alt, pushing in. I'm looking for just texturing, some kind of recipe. Let's put a little bald spot back there, even though it's got a lot happening. Control, click, and drag to refigure the topology out. And then I'm going to come into snake hook. I'm going to come in with alpha 23. I don't like that. Alpha 25. Just moving this around in a circle. That has this really peculiar behavior. Again, looking for a recipe. You can definitely be sculpting this yourself, but I'm looking for some kind of recipe that'll help us understand ZBrush and maybe even look at it in a new way. Okay, this is actually fairly well suited, I think, for what we're doing here because it's going to create these matted clumps. The key is just to not get it too regularized. So I'm making sure to move around a lot and change my orientation. And draw size is not a bad thing to adjust. Okay, looks interesting. What happens if I press Control, click and drag to refigure out the topology? Well, it goes a little nutty, so let's undo that. I'm going to add another step where I'm inflating, because one of the issues with Dynamesh is that in very thin parts of the model it'll start to it'll just lose all form. So by inflating, we're essentially going to pull all volumes outwards a little bit, give them a little bit of a tooth for Dynamesh to hang on to. And that's working out okay. There we go. Control, click and drag, and we've got something that's a little bit more evolved. But what I might want to do is add some resolution to this. Now I want the hair to start to do even more. So I'm going to drop out of Dynamesh, I'm going to increase the resolution, and go back into Dynamesh. And now it's getting much more of that. Much more.